So thank you for joining this discussion. So it's basically about, what we need to take into consideration when modeling the just transition, which is not a straightforward process now that we've learned, those of us who are doing a lot on this work. Adiola, let me start with you, because after that presentation, and I think you've already touched on this, and I think this is probably the best place to start this conversation, because I think the work of linking the CGE models with microsimulations tells us a lot, right? That we couldn't necessarily get out of standard macroeconomic models. But I think just as a point of emphasis, because a lot of us are sitting with a question on what do we need to do to ensure justice, what can this exercise of linking the CGE with microsimulations tell us more of as we model for a just transition?
Yeah. So let me put it this way. So like I've mentioned, it gives you a deeper look into what this means. Remember, this is not an exercise in predicting the future. It's an exercise in saying, if there is a policy change, and we know what the labor market looks like now, how is that policy change likely to affect the labor market? And in the context of South Africa, you can actually think of that in 3 ways. So we had this discussion with the skills team under the project and the social assistance team. The first one is to say, well, I am going to design some mitigation strategy focusing on people that lost their job as a result of the transition. But if you do that, the social assistance team will tell you, then you're just reproducing what is before, because you're focusing on those who lost employment as a result of this transition. I was on the other side of this divide. I said, well, but isn't that what you're trying to do? But then the counter-argument to that is that we know that there is a positive relationship between energy availability and growth and jobs. So the reason why the people that don't have jobs now don't have jobs is partly related to energy too. So why would you then leave them behind and then focus on only the people that only lost their employment because of the energy transition? And there is a third part to this, which our model cannot see yet. Professor Imran is very interested in this, is in climate things happening and affecting people, and how do you account for that in all of this? So the idea of just energy transition is broad, and you have to think of it in layers, and this kind of analysis allows you, at least in terms of jobs and who is affected and which household is affected, you can, for example, start taking into consideration household composition. Female-headed households are already a vulnerable group. If it turns out that they are also affected by the transition, then that is a very important piece of information that says you need to do something about that. So it is in getting to the granular level and understanding what is the demography of people that will be affected, which then informs your mitigation strategy, is why this is very important.
Sure, thanks for that. I think that's a really important reflection, especially because, there's an expectation that we've built in society that we're not going to leave anyone behind, right? So then now when we start to assess winners and losers and try to understand how we can mitigate the losses, I think it's very important when we start to think about these and when we start to craft sort of like interventions, you do them in a sense that you mitigate those losses, and kind of understanding, again, the within group heterogeneity. It also helps us to be more cognitive in terms of the things that we are proposing. It's not just a blanket sort of like application. Maybe for you, Natasha, and let me just say, it's so refreshing to see somebody that's close in age with me. Because you're energetic and you believe you can solve everything, and nobody has tainted your view of the world as yet. So I like the fact that you're here with us today. So maybe for you, Natasha, with the research work, in energy modeling, what do you see as the most important gap, right? If money wasn't an issue, if we didn't have like any constraints, what would you say like is the big important research gap in understanding the socioeconomic impact of the energy transition in South Africa? So if I'm appointed president tomorrow and I call on you, Natasha, and I'm like, what is the big thing that we need to address? What is the biggest gap? What would you say it is?
I think maybe the way we collect data on the informal sector. So I think when you look at the survey data, it normally just asks you, are you employed, yes or no? And normally when people move out of employment, they don't, when people move out of formal employment, they don't necessarily go to unemployment. They can also go to informal work. And when we are analyzing the data and we don't have that distinction between formal work, unemployed, and informal work, we kind of misrepresent who actually wins and who actually loses. So I think that is a very interesting gap that can be filled.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that reflection. Colleen, let me come to you. And you know, we're really guilty of like relegating sort of adaptation, and it further exacerbates the challenge that we're sitting with. So we're huge advocates in the PCC of addressing both mitigation and adaptation, because we can see the clear interrelation between the two. So from an adaptation and human security perspective, how should we think about vulnerability when designing just transition policies? I'm quite keen to hear your response on this, because, you know, sometimes you run the risk of wanting to address vulnerability from a sectoral point of view, right? So we look at the sectors that we need and that are highly vulnerable. But then, you know, when we subject this to stakeholders, then they say we clearly don't understand vulnerability well enough. So it could be great to also hear from you how we should actually be thinking about vulnerability.
Thanks very much. And I'm glad I'm coming in after the youth on the panel. I won't take it as an insult that I'm the oldest in the room. But to get to your point, I do think the micro-modeling should be also informed by a much deeper sense of vulnerability. Those of us who work...
Sorry, Colleen, if you could just hold it. Is it not working? There we go.
Right. I do think the way we are in the just transition and the energy work, it's very, very, very complex. But I think this whole notion of what is the meaning of work, we need to understand and expand our understanding of the meaning of work. And so you spoke about the complex informality and different people doing work. And so there are groups at WITS, and I know the PCC have, I think, engaged with them, people like the REAL team, people at Rhodes University doing a lot of work on issues of vulnerability. What worries me about micro-modeling is that depending on the assumptions you bring into the models, that takes you already down the pathway that you're going to end up on. And so those of us who work on adaptation in this room will know that context really matters. It matters where you work. If you're going to work in an informal area, if you're going to work in a coastal area, if you're going to work in an urban setting. I've just had the privilege of coming with a group of colleagues who were doing eco-imagining last week in Limpopo. We were with the University of Limpopo. And any of you who've driven up to Limpopo, it's an amazing drive as you head into the mountains, into the Heinetzberg. Because the informal, and I would imagine most of it is informal, economy there is booming. Housing infrastructure, car repair shops, nail and beauty clinics, et cetera, I don't know where that data has been captured, how it's been put in, but that's the vibe, I think. And that's right on the road. That's not hiding these people under or in the backyard somewhere. That's in your face. So I worry about these micro models as long as we are teasing out the assumptions correctly. And then just very quickly, because we're in Cape Town and we've had heat waves here in Cape Town, what about, you know, who are we missing? So the retired people, like myself, will soon be. What about the elderly? What about the youth? And then my last point, I just want to ask about where is the data coming from? Where are the data coming from? There are data gatekeepers. We've been trying to do work on really complex informalities and really capturing a micro sense. And honestly, I query the data, I query the gatekeepers, and I'm not sure how informed we are going to be around this very, very complicated topic. Thanks.
Sure. You've opened a can of worms around the especially the gatekeeping of data, because we can only know what we can subject to models and tools. So if the access to data is a challenge, we're clearly maybe exacerbating the issue. And Colleen, this is why we have such a diverse group here today in this group. This is what this community of practice is all about. I know, you said vibes when you were commenting, so I'm like, you are not a day over 25. So this is why we need the diversity in the room, and this is the importance of building this community of practice, because there may be a problem here that somebody understands how to resolve in the room, and having these conversations helps us address that. I'm going to come to you, Adiola, because Colleen has raised an important issue that, there's a worry about the micro-simulations. Depending on the assumptions that we use, we've kind of already predetermined a result. Do you want to maybe come back and respond to that? Because I like the micro-simulations, actually. I like them a lot. And we've just concluded a project where I just felt, why didn't we go the micro-simulation route? But Colleen is saying something that I think we should give a few minutes to kind of address.
So I agree with her completely. But the way modeling works is that the real world, is very complex. And you need to make certain assumptions to simplify it so that you can model. And this is why I appreciate what is done under that project, where you have CG and micro-simulation modeling working on one part, and you have the other part of the analysis based on qualitative analysis, and actually, because then you can drill down better and get at these things that Colleen is talking about. You cannot account for all of that. We must recognize the limitation of the tools in a CGA model or a micro-simulation model. You can't get at all of that, because you have to make simplifying assumption to be able to run the model. Otherwise, if you want to account for everything, then you don't have a model that's actually tractable. So that is a very important point that highlights the importance of synergy between the different approach of addressing the question, that you have to understand the limitation of the tools you are using, and then allow other people to be able to answer the questions you are not able to answer.
So thanks for that, and for making that point that, arising out of the project that the PCC did, hopefully someone will refine the assumptions even better. Like if we've missed it, because I know the whole, and the question has come up, because basically in that study, what we've said is, regardless of what the carbon constraint is, if GDP increases, employment will increase, right? So somebody, and I heard that there was a proposal around through sensitivity analysis, we could see things differently, and these are probably areas of further study. So anybody who's doing research in the room, please go out there and do further work. This is how we're building sort of on the evidence, and it's also helping us.
Can I add to that quickly?
Sure.
Just to address the other part she mentioned, is the access to data. Sure. We're struggling a lot with that in the modeling community. We don't have infrastructure to collect data on the kind of scene you've suggested. We have some firm-level data collected by the World Bank, but they're only restricted to formal firms. And it's not representative, the collected data in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And you're talking a specific section of the society, and you're not getting at the nitty-gritty of where you actually need to investigate. The other thing I notice is that the population of South Africa is increasing, But when you look at the data set, the number of observations is going in the opposite direction because funding data is expensive. But essentially, what that means technically is that you are lumping things under weight. So you collect less data and you use weight to weight it up to population level. That is not actually the best, but I understand the funding restriction, but there is a need to look at making data available for this kind of analysis.
Sure, I agree with you 100%. Colleen, you want to come back?
Yeah, I just want to come in. I think this notion, when I said there's not adequate data, especially if, for example, around heat health, we've struggled with getting information around the elderly. But what I want to argue is, we're sitting here and the PCC, the Presidential Climate Commission, is here in the room. That is a commission that is supposed to be spearheading, and I think they are, activities in the country where we have gaps. And I know for a fact, we've got UCT here, we've got other colleagues, I've just come from the field in 2 weeks. We've collected masses of data, not just me, but people from UKZN. We've got vignettes, stories that could fill this room. Why don't we have an architecture and infrastructure that actually collects that data, starts to archive that data? Let's spearhead and bring together some kind of activity that actually enables us to do that. Because, if we don't have a good sense of what is currently happening, how on earth are we going to think about the future? And, Deborah's in the room, the overshoot studies. I think to say that, well, we've got a micro model and it's got these assumptions and it's limited. But hang on, folks, if we really wanted to focus on adaptation with all the brains in the room and the intellectual trust here, we should be able to get something together. Because I think, unfortunately, with the funding cuts as well, funders are still wanting to fund us, but they're overlapping. They're sending stuff into the same cohorts of work, the same places. I'm involved in a project right now where in parts of Zambia, for example, the same village community is being funded by 2 funding agencies. That's absurd, I think. So I don't know if our UK colleagues can help us with that, but I think, we can make a plan, as we say in South Africa. We should be making a plan. And I think the PCC, along with others in this room, we should be coming up with something.
Sure, and I agree with you 100%. So, Jürgen, that's your new KPI. We need infrastructure that collects data, and ideally, if it could be on the PCC website. So, this is your new KPI. We're giving you an assignment. I'm mindful of time, and I feel like I also want to give the floor an opportunity to comment. I do see. Oh wow, is that 5 or? Is it both 5 and 10? You're giving me 15 minutes, thank you. So I'm going to take the hand of, and please do introduce yourself when you want to raise a question.
Travis Frank, Climate Policy Lab at Tufts University. I just want to actually add to the, I feel like I struggle with data, we all struggle with data and data availability. I feel like the request or the call for the Uber database is always yours, is perennial. And what I worry is that I don't see the support of the researchers to do it. So I would just comment that, like, you're 100% right. If we all got together, we could really make a really great data set, or and standardize it and normalize it, et cetera. But the thing is like, you collected all those data from the field 2 weeks ago. What's your motivation, resources available, time available to put it in a central database? And I just wanted to note, like, we all want it, but it's really hard for us to make the time to do the right thing and to make it, to clean it up and to put it in a central database. And I just want to say, like, I've years watching this, and I just acknowledge that reality is we all get the data, we process it for the research question that we're working on, we probably move on, the funding moves on, we need the next grant, et cetera, or whatever it is. But like the cleaning up and that last step to make it useful for someone else is very rarely done.
Sure, I just want to check if there are more questions. Okay, if I could take a question from you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mpor. I am from UCT in the Faculty of Law. I'm doing my PhD in energy law. And I wrote an article about gender sensitivity where I was analyzing gender framing on the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And what I found is how the scientists and lawyers work in silos, right? And there's no collaboration. And my question is then, how do you think we can bridge that gap where, as policymakers, we make evidence-based strategies for just transition, you know? Because ultimately, if we do not understand the science behind it, we just make laws and policies blindfolded, you know, because we don't really understand the science behind it. So how do we bridge the gap where there is communication between the scientists and lawyers or policymakers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to check if there's any more questions before I hand over to the panel. We can take your question.
Okay, good morning. I'm Bernard Becker from Stellenbosch University. I'm representing the technical side, the engineering side. And the first is just a comment to say sympathy. We share that same problem. The more detailed your model become, obviously the more detailed your data that you need to have accurate. So that's quite obvious. Yeah. And we're struggling with exactly the same issue. In our case, the data is obviously available because you have a system operator, you have a ESCOM or a detailed technology company. We are academics, and often there's a lot of NDAs that need to be signed, and yeah, it's difficult to get the data. So yes, sympathy there. My question to you is more related to what you presented, which I really enjoyed. If the transition is obviously, there's a lot of technology in it. We are moving from coal and from certain technologies to a different range of technologies like renewables, whether it's nuclear or gas or whatever. Each of these would have impacts in terms of employment, which is quite detailed. A typical gas plant would employ this range of skilled and unskilled people coming from these sort of sectors. Same with a wind farm, compared to a coal power station and all the industries related to keeping that beast running. Do you have that level of data in your micro models? And if not, is that not a really crucial component to be able to tell how people move between, or how households, employment, etc. change? So that's just my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Baker. What Prof. Baker's not telling you is that even after we've promised to sign the NDAs, the data still doesn't come. And what we end up with is stuff that's so bad, like we actually can't even make use of it. So NDAs won't help you, FYI. It just goes to the comments around the need for better data because it helps us make more informed decisions. I mean, when I think about the grid study that we're working on, if we just had access to that data and what we could tell the South African government, what we could tell ESCOM, what we could tell the NTCSA, I think was groundbreaking. But because we just could not get over the hurdle of data sensitivities, it's a shame because then we can't actually make those better informed decisions. So, in terms of background on that, Colleen, let me start with you. So there was a question that was raised around, how do we get people who are clearly doing really important work, together and to collaborate more effectively to shape a just transition? Because I want to know what you've gotten from your field work. The lawyers want to understand what you're saying. I, in the PCC, want to understand how this works. How do we get this sort of like transdisciplinary collaboration working more effectively?
Yeah, thanks for that. So just to preface it with one comment, that I'm not only suggesting that those who are knowledgeable, so-called, in the room, or scientists, are the only ones who should be brought to the table. And so I spend a lot of time working with practitioners, those who've got huge amounts of knowledge that aren't classified, if you like, in some of these normal kind of circles that we deal with. So that's another whole set of things, and we're doing a lot of that at WITS. But in order to answer your question, I think what I worry about is the window is closing around climate change. We've really got to move it now. We've got to put foot on the pedal, and also be doing the deeper work, the reflexive work, but also the wider, inclusive work. And so my worry is that we are reinventing the wheel of some collectives. So NBI is here in the room. You know, they've already got a huge database. They've got people they've been talking to for years and years and years. You know, so I worry that we don't seem to have an effective cataloging of who's around, who's been doing this. The NGOs have been working on this for decades. So I just kind of feel that, you know, everyone's flurrying about, there's consultants flurrying about. You know, I get students wanting to apply to do another vulnerability study in Guyana. Well, hello, yes, Guyana just got nearly washed away. But we've done the studies before, and yet I don't see anything feeding into policy. So I kind of lambasted the NRF a little bit and the German funders we had in the room last week, because I said, surely as funders, you must be keeping a catalogue at the National Research Foundation of who we're funding. And maybe we must stop funding X and rather fund gender-based issues linking to law. I mean, it's not up. I think the point made by our colleague from Tufts is right. We as academics don't have time. Can you imagine the NGOs don't have time? They're just busy scurrying to get money now because the funds are closing. So to answer your question, I don't want to add to the KPI of... But someone needs to be doing some of those inventories. And there are collectives. We just need to go out and find them and then find the synergies, which I think is the purpose of this meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't know lawyers were going to be in the room here today. So please do make networks, have a chat. Please, for goodness sake, can we stop replicating what's out there? And I think the thing is the funders continue to fund the replication. So that's the
nexus keeps growing.
Growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. Adiola, maybe if you can come in to answer Prof. Becker's question.
Yeah, very important question. I think that's important. From what we've done so far, it's all driven by probabilities. But you remember, part of the probabilities accounting for individual characteristics. Now, where it gets really difficult is that you could include some information on sector or where these people are working in that to account for that. But that is easy to do if you already know where the person is working. Remember what we're doing, it's possible that we find somebody in the data set that is now being employed, but we have no sector information for them because we don't know where they're working before. So that's another thing where it goes back to data. With panel data, you may be able to figure out maybe this person was employed before and became unemployed, and then you're predicting that the person will be employed again. You have some information of where they have worked before. But if you have repeated cross-section, you don't know anything about that. You could also refine the way the probabilities move to account for that. Again, it becomes more complex. But I think that is still possible. But none of that has been done yet. Maybe people like Natasha will take that up.
You see what I mean? But thanks for also drilling down on that. So Prof. Haroon Borat is not here today, but one of the things that he often laments about is the fact that it's so difficult for them to get access to firm-level data. And he sees that as a huge impediment for them to kind of like understand the intricacies like within sectors and like firm-level information. So again, another thing for KPIs to expand, but there's clearly something that's there that we need to investigate a bit further. So Natasha, the baton has been handed over to you. You've got a lot that's also riding on what you've presented. But I think in your presentation, so there was just this issue around sort of machine learning approaches in future work. Maybe just take us through how could these methods enhance modeling, especially of the labor market transitions?
So I'm not as familiar with machine learning as I am with traditional econometrics models. But I saw that in our simulation, when we are predicting the wages, maybe Prof, you can come in to rectify me if I'm not explaining it properly. We model the wage predictions based on the people that are already employed, right? And when we move people from the unemployed sector into the employed, we're doing out of sample predictions. And I know that machine learning is better suited for that compared to our traditional econometric model. So I think that is where we're leading into.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. You clearly know way more than me, actually. So well done for that. I can get one more question, and then we need to wrap it up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to find out.
If you could please introduce yourself.
My name is Kaitano Dube. I just wanted to find out from Val University of Technology. I just wanted to find out, there's an element that is being, particularly when we talk about vulnerability. Is this a static thing? Or vulnerability is quite fluid, which changes as social, economic, and environmental dimensions change? Because to me, there is no harm in trying to either we can still do vulnerability assessment to establish if the dimensions that we think are existing are still in existence, or things are changing. So maybe a quick comment on that would assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Colleen, I'm gonna direct that one to you.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think a lot of the work that is again being done is, so many of us who've worked in places where it is quite dynamic. So for example, we do a lot of work in Alexandra Township. There's work that's been going on in KZN in some communities. You actually have to stay with those communities for a long time. So I take your point. So no one is saying, you know, we wouldn't go into a room, especially with local communities, but also the local municipalities, and put up data from 2009 and say that's the vulnerability. I mean, that would get us blasted out the room. So unfortunately, though, I know the issues that we can't all be resident in communities, et cetera, but those trust-building relationships are critical, so that when you want to bring them in, they trust who's been working there for a long, long time. But I just want to quickly end. I'm not saying I'm anti-models. I'm really pro. My boss is Francois Engelbrecht, one of maybe the best modelers in South Africa, if not Africa. But what I'm pleading for is not only hardware and hard infrastructure, but that in the adaptation community, we link that, but also to the software, the policy integration, the work that it takes to work with practitioners, blah, 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 blah. But your point is valid, but I hope I've tried to answer it. It's a tough one. It's a real tough one.
Thanks for that, Colleen, and thank you to my panel. And apologies if I couldn't see anybody beyond that side. Sorry, I couldn't see people. But thank you very much for this really interesting and interactive engagement.